Okay, let's have one last big talk about talking the talk of wine. And this one is a doozy, so hang on. I'm not going to lie, it's some pretty complex stuff we're going to talk about. And even though this is an intro to wine drinking course, I think it's important to intro at least these terms and these ideas so that you get it more whenever you're tasting wine, describing wine, reading descriptions about wine, and of course interacting with others about wine. Because people will talk about wine and talk about certain descriptors that we've already thrown out. Is it jammy or plummy or earthy or spicy? And we get those terms, but there's some other things that are thrown out that we're like, what are they talking about? Oh, this wine is creamy or elegant or silky smooth with a long finish. Oh, it's really in balance. Or this is a slightly out of balance. What do these things mean? Well, they are complex, but I think I can pick off a few things here and there to get you in the ballpark of understanding. I will start with perhaps the easier of the two, body and balance. The easier of the two would be body. Because body is actually just, when we're speaking of the body of the wine, you can have the body of any beverage, body of food, I suppose. But you're talking about a tactile sensation, that is feeling. When you're talking about body, whether it's thin body or a viscous, thick body or a full, rich body, what we're talking about is how does it feel? And you'll actually often hear terms like mouthfeel and again, long, elegant finish. And people like, non-wine drinkers like, what the hell are people talking about? I'm just drinking this to get drunk. But the body is a tactile sensation, and I do truly want you to do this experiment at home. As outlined in the Drink This Now textbook in greater detail. I'm going to hit it quick here. And that is, if you want to understand body and train your senses a little bit better, you can do this down and dirty quick, which is just get a ton of different beverages. They don't all have to be wine. In fact, only one or two of them should be wine. I'm talking about getting a bunch of different liquids that are consumable, don't get poisoned, and putting them in front of you in random glasses, it doesn't matter, and get things like water, milk, maybe something crazy viscous like porter, sherry, or honey, maybe something with carbonation like a beer or even a Coca-Cola or even carbonated water, a shot of alcohol of your choice, although the thinner the better, so I'd say like a simple vodka, can even be a cheap one, and then maybe a couple of wines. Put all these things in front of you, and then put a clip on your nose. Clip off with a clothespin, a vise, I don't care, an adjustable wrench, whatever you want to do, pinch off your nose, because I don't want you thinking about taste or smell. Remember, most of our taste is in the smell, so just blocking off that nose is going to take all those aroma and flavors and smells out of your way, and you're only going to feel. So what I want you to do is go through this lineup and start with water, because water is a nice base, and sip it. You can drink it if you want to, or just swish it around your mouth and spit it out. And just think about it. What did it feel like? Now, water's a good one to start with because it don't feel like nothing. That's what's great about water. Don't look like nothing, don't taste like nothing, don't feel like nothing either on the senses. It's just water. But then go to something like milk. By the way, you can do this blindfolded if you like. Get a partner or significant other to blindfold you and feed you these things. Ooh, kind of erotic maybe, a little 9.5 weeks action. But that's not the point. The point is I want you to take away the smell, take away the sight even, and put milk in your mouth then. And swish that around. Again, swallow it if you want or spit it out. And doesn't that feel different? Without even doing this, you know this implicitly already. Yeah, it has a different feel. It's coating, it's perhaps creamy, it's smoother. Yeah, it's not even wine. I'm talking about milk. It's the fats in there is reacting differently with your mouth. You can get crazy with something like honey. I mean, that has different bodies for sure. I don't even know if you can drink it, but you can try. But then do something like a carbonated beverage. Like I said, beer, sparkling water, champagne for those highfalutin folks out there. And actually go back and forth between water and even carbonated water or carbonated anything, and you will detect, wow, even just carbonated water has way more body. The CO2 in there is filling up the mouth. You can feel it. It gives a tactile sensation of fullness. The one I actually definitely want you to try, although you think I'm joking, is something like liquor. A simple vodka or gin. Anything that doesn't have a lot of flavor or a lot of feel to it. And the reason I want it kind of as raw as possible, get moonshine if you're in a certain part of the country, is because I want you to actually feel alcohol. I know that sounds bizarre, but alcohol, maybe you'll get a heat, prickly sensation. Again, no taste, but it'll actually give quite a bit of mouthfeel. Alcohol is kind of heavy. It's creamier than water. It may look like water, all right? It may not have a lot of smell or flavor at all, but it will feel much differently. Okay, now, and again, pick whatever other beverages you want and just concentrate on what does that feel like on my palate. And then you can kind of finish off with wines, as many as you want, white wine, a red wine, multiple whites, multiple reds. And again, doing this swish and the swirl and maybe spitting it out or drinking it, it's up to you. The whites will feel slightly different than reds. And actually, if you could have a light Pinot Noir red that'll feel lighter on the palate, it just will feel thinner, a thinner body, as opposed to a huge, big, full red Zinfandel or Malbec or Bordeaux. You'll be able to feel, whoa, that's fuller. It's rich. It's filling my mouth more. I can actually feel more. That's all about the body. Now, of all these beverages, who cares about the other ones? We're mostly going to concentrate on wine now. Now that you know what body is, and when people say, oh, this wine has a thinner body, oh, okay, I get that. It's thinner on the palate. Oh, this is luscious and full body. Okay. And when people say, oh, this wine has a really elegant, long, silky, smooth finish, that's like, oh, that's smooth. It's like drinking silk. Yes, wines can have that too. Or it's harsh finish. Oh, it's a little aggressive on my palate. All these are talking about the body. And when people say it actually has a long finish, that means can you still feel it, the elegance or the harshness after it's going down your throat? The finish. Think about doing a shot of liquor. If you're like, oh, I can feel that warmness going down my throat. Yeah, that's the finish. You can talk about the wine in those terms too. But back to talking about the body of wine and the body of all these things. What gives a beverage body, specifically for our class, wine? Well, water, of course, has really no body. It's just kind of neutral. And guess why? There's nothing in it. But what would be in maybe some of these other beverages, but also wine to give it body? I'm glad you asked. 4 elements with a possible crazy wild card 5th. And again, we're talking about wines. What gives the body? What gives feel to it? Sugars can give wine a creamy feel. As I've already referenced, alcohol is in wine, and alcohol can give a fuller mouthfeel and a richness. But also crazy things that maybe you haven't thought of, like acids, which are in all wines to some extent, some lesser, some more. And the last one is tannins, a tannic component, and that one's a little more bizarre and not existent in all wines. And the crazy wild card 5th one is something I'll just call the wild card of luscious full flavor. And that is, we've been talking about flavor, describing wines already, but it's a wild card, but just the sensations of lots of fruit and jam and earth and plum and spice, the flavor component itself actually can play a role in feeling something on the palate. So those are the 5. The flavor one's the kind of the wild card, but the other 4 for sure are either in wines or the lack thereof can affect the body, and it affects the balance. Now this, my friends, is a much trickier beast altogether. You got body, that's tactile, that's feel, got it. Balance makes wines good or great, or not so great at all. Because before I even left the body, I should have told you, there's no designated good body or bad body in wines. It's not that light-bodied wines are bad and full-bodied wines are good. Not at all. Most white wines have a lighter body to them. Nice, crisp, acidic Chardonnay on a summertime day, that's fantastic. You want a light body. So there's no good or bad body, but what there can be is balanced wine. And a good balanced wine is good, and a not so balanced wine is really bad. Okay. How do you get balance in wine? And these are, again, are terms you will hear a lot in wine descriptions, particularly if it's not working. Again, to re-stress right from the get-go, and hopefully I'll remember to say this at the end. There's no good or bad body, but there is good and bad balance. And mediocre wines might be missing a bit of balance, and they're just, Good wines have good balance, and great wines have great balance. What am I talking about with balance? Well, I already told you the 4 things with a possible 5th wild card that are in wines that can give it body. that give it feel, that give it texture, that give it lots of other things. And of course, they also might give it flavors, but that's separate. We've already talked about flavor. And those things counteract or interact with each other to create a sense of harmony in a wine. I'm getting all philosophical here talking about harmony, but it's late in the day and I'm feeling good because I've been drinking wine all day doing these videos. So, how do these particular four entities interact to help a wine balance itself and integrate and be great? It's actually kind of interesting. I hadn't thought about this till I thought about how to teach it. And the elements I talked about, acid, tannin, sugar, and alcohol, are actually on two sides of a scale, let's call it, okay, that balance the wine out. Of course, you want it to be balanced on both sides. And two on this side are, say, acid and tannins behave in certain ways to build certain components into the body and feel of a wine and pull it one direction. And actually, alcohol and sugar are very similar on the other side of the scale, and they pull the wine in a different direction. If you're out of balance, that means it's got too much of one of these, too much sugar, too much alcohol, and not enough acid or tannins, or too much acids or tannins and not enough sugar or alcohol to make it balanced. That makes sense? So consider these two things. There's tannins versus sugars. If one's way too high, then the thing's out of balance. If the other's way too high, then it's out of balance. Oh, you got just the right amount of sugar, just the right amount of tannins, boom, that's a balanced wine. And if you're lacking one of these in a very big way, that would cause an imbalance and stuff that we'll say, oh, that doesn't seem right. It doesn't pull together, and I'll throw out some terms as we go along the way. So what are these four things that I talked about with that possible fifth wild card? In no particular order, because all wines pretty much have at least a little bit of this, let's start with things like acid. So on one side of this balancing act are acids and tannins. We'll start with acids. Acids are existent in all wines to a greater or lesser extent because they're existent in all wine grapes. And when we say acids, a lot of people are like, what acid? I don't want acid in my wine. Like battery acid's going to burn me? No. There are other acids, edible acids, good acids. And the ones that you're most familiar with are things like citric acid, like in oranges, lemons, limes, citrus. When you bite into that, it's like, oh yeah, lights up the side of your tongue. That's a flavor most of us really like. So an acidic flavor in a wine can be kind of bracing, steely, light up the sides of your tongue. It can be really quite delightful in certain wines. But acids exist in almost all wines because they're in wine grapes. Now, wine grapes don't really have that much citric acid, but they have a couple others. One of them is called malic acid, and that's the acid you find in, say, a green apple, like a green Granny Smith apple. Ever bitten one of those? You bite into it, woo, tart, yeah, that's acidic bite. You know it already. But another acid called tartaric acid, you've really never heard of that one, and that's fine. But that's the one that's in the highest concentrations of grape. Higher concentrations of tartaric acid in grapes than any other fruit, than any other thing on planet Earth. It's one of the reasons why wines can last. It's one of the reasons why they can kind of preserve themselves. They're high in this one particular acid. But let's get back to wine. In the wines, the acids in white grapes, green grapes, black grapes, red grapes, both of these acids are in existence. And some of them, if not a lot of them, can carry through to the finished wine. So you can have a wine, again, that tastes acidic, but even when you don't taste it, it can be there in amounts that are balancing out the other things. So acids are in pretty much every single wine, even if you don't taste a tart acid bite, okay? Now, tannins are not necessarily existent in all wines because tannins are derived mostly from the skins of grapes. They kind of come along with the color, and so in wines that are white or light in color, there's not a lot of color, so there's not a lot of tannic component. The tannins are found in grape skins, predominantly and excessively in darker skinned grapes. They're also in the stems, they're also in the seeds, and tannins are kind of this crazy thing. I'm not even exactly sure how to define it, but the feel that they give is pretty identifiable. Tannins, first off, they also help preserve a wine, and in large amounts, particularly in young wines, can be very aggressive, and that's because they put in a certain mouthfeel and flavor into the finished wine. High tannic wines are usually almost always big red wines. The darker the wine, the more tannic component we would expect out of it. The lighter the wine, less tannins. Completely white wines, maybe no tannins. You can also get tannic component actually from oak barrels. So you can actually age a white wine that doesn't have many tannins in an oak barrel and get some tannic structure. And you can age your big red wines, which already have a ton of tannins, in an oak barrel, and they'll get even more tannins. Okay, enough about tannins, but so what the hell does it do? It's this component that actually gives a dry pucker mouth feeling. Now, acid lights up the side of the tongue. That's a tart flavor. Tannins are a dry, puckering flavor. The best way I can describe tannins to you, if you want to really kind of find out what they're all about, is go get some black tea and get like 2 or 3 or 4 tea bags of black tea and put them into one big boiling cup of water and just let it sit there and extract for like a half an hour, and then drink a big swig of that tea. Whew! That's almost pure tannic action. And it will, again, you're drinking a beverage that makes you thirsty. It'll dry your mouth out. It sucks up all the moisture out of your mouth physically. And by the way, also after you drink that tea, it's like, whoa, I feel it. You can actually rub your tongue on your upper palate and it'll feel like kind of sandpaper, all right? That's what it does. Other ways you can get this fantastic sensation are try a teaspoon of ground cinnamon in your mouth. Now, cinnamon tastes like cinnamon, but it's ground so fine that it's actually like sawdust. And when you put it in your mouth, it has the same like action where it just sucks all the moisture out of your mouth. You're like, I can't breathe. In fact, I think there's something on the internet now called the Cinnamon Challenge where people try to eat a tablespoon of ground cinnamon. You go Google that. Big mistake. And the reason it's hard to do it is because the tannins are concentrated in that, and they literally just draw all the moisture out of your mouth. That tannic action is what we're talking about here. And it pulls the wine in another direction altogether. On this side, pulls it one way. I do want to add a couple of things about tannins. As I've already said, mostly in red wines, the darker the wine, the more. If it's been oaked, more tannic structure. And it's one of the reasons why we age wines, and one of the reasons why some wines age. I know it sounds like the same thing, but it's not. Sometimes we age wines because these big tannins in big, huge red wines, like, say, Bordeaux, titanic big red wines, or huge Malbec, or huge Zinfandel out of California, they can, when they're created, actually Barolos out of northeast Italy as well, northwest Italy. They're so huge and so black and so dark and so tannic when they're created that it's too much. The wine is out of balance. And it will destroy everything else around it. So one of the reasons why we age wine is because tannins will actually soften over time. So when this particular wine, I'll hold it up here, from it's 2004, a Bordeaux from 2004. Why would you have a 2004 wine for sale in a wine store? Because it's just now getting to the point of being drinkable. Because when it came out in 2004, it would have been so tannic as to be excessive and nasty, right? So we say, hey, tannins will actually evolve over time, so this one's too big right now. I'll set that one down and put it in my cellar. Over time, the tannins actually evolve or devolve and soften. Soften up. Actually, some of them will fall out of solution. That's why you get a little sediment in the bottom of some older wines. And they will chemically integrate with the other components in the wine and chill over time. So tannins are awesome and huge up front, can help a wine last. And the reason you want a wine to last is because there are some flavors that will come forward in wine 10 or 15 or 20 years from now that you simply cannot get right now. You simply cannot get them. But you have to make a wine that's really big so it'll last. And in lasting, it's like, okay, now we have the opportunity to see what this wine's going to taste like in 10 or 20 years because it could last, and now all these different flavors are there now that the tannins have softened up and got out of the way. Just to throw you another bottle out here, 1987, and this is Chateau Mouton Rothschild, another Bordeaux. Yeah, this one was probably fantastic and soft and supple when you drank it last night for dinner. In 1987 or 1988, right after it was made, this thing would have been a tannic bomb, would have been horrific. And wines that are well crafted and age well, again, integrate over time to make fantastic wines 20 and 30 years later, not so good right when they're created. So when you have a wine that's too tannic, you're like, whoa, I'm either not drinking this now or I'll cellar it or throw it away and get something else. On to the next move, though. We're going to go to the other side of the scale, right? The other side of the scale of balance in wine to sugar. All wines got sugar. At least they started that way. There's sugar in the grape juice. And we've talked about this a couple different times already. The process of fermentation itself is when yeast eat the sugar in grape juice and convert it into alcohol. Cool. And we've already talked about it. You can have a dry wine or a sweet wine or a semi-sweet wine, depending on when you stop the fermentation, how much sugar is still left in the bottle. Residual sugar. If a wine has any residual sugar, that will affect the aroma, the flavor, but also the body and the balance. Of course, not all wines have residual sugar. A full dry wine means there's none in there. But you'll be surprised to look at the labels and pay attention. You'll find that, oh, actually wines that are some red wines or some other wines that I thought were 100% completely dry might still have a 0.01 residual sugar, and that again does play into the body. A lot of white wines have slightly more than most reds. Most reds are dry, but most whites have a little bit of residual sugar, and that's in there to interplay again, to help with this balance. So sugar content can affect the balance. And finally, alcohol. Alcohol created from the sugar. The alcohol is what we want from that sugar in our wine. And alcohol does, as you've hopefully already now found out by drinking straight alcohol with a clothespin on your nose, it adds body. You believe it or not, you'd be like, oh, I've had moonshine before. It's clear and it doesn't taste like nothing, doesn't look like nothing, but it burns like hell. It actually builds body. It builds a creaminess into the beverage. So the alcohol content affects the body and, again, can affect the balance. So one side of the scale. One side of the scale is pulling up or down depending on the levels of acids or tannins in the wine, and those are counteracted or not by sugar and alcohol within the wine. As one goes up, you want to raise the other one so it'll still be balanced. As one goes down, you want to lower the other one down, and so you keep everything in balance. And when it doesn't work, here's what happens, and I'll kind of go through these one at a time. All these wines in front of me, I've had them all. They're balanced wines. And they're all balanced even though they have different levels of stuff. Let's start with this one. Vinho Verde from Portugal. High acid wine. At least it seems that way. And the body of it seems that way. Crisp, acidic, lights up the tongue. You're like, whoa, this is straight acid. Crazy. High acid. Okay, well, that's true. But if it was so super high acid and didn't have anything else, it would be out of balance. It would be too bracing. It would be crazy. So what you find in even a wine like this that's high detectable acid on the body and on the palate, it actually has some residual sugar that pulls that back down into place. Oh, that's right. And it also has alcohol in it that's pulling. So here it's really high acid, but it's got a little bit of residual sugar and a little bit of alcohol on that count on the scale. It's pulling it down, and so it's a balanced wine. So high acid can be countered with some residual sugar and the alcohol that's in it that builds that creamy factor, and the wild card number 5, which can be applied everywhere, which is fruity, luscious flavors that can kind of bridge the scale. Wine 2 we've already referenced here. This big Bordeaux from 2004, probably tannic bomb as hell when it was produced back in 2004, 2005. Probably completely undrinkable then. Then they put it in an oak barrel, probably picked up even more tannic component. So how are we going to balance this out? Well, way high tannins, probably no sugar at all, okay? No sugar, not many acids, although they're probably about this many, all right? Some tartaric acid in there, but it's higher alcohol. So the higher alcohol kind of balances out the tannins a little bit. That makes sense? And also, as I've already pointed out, we're going to let this sucker chill out. So it's naturally by itself going to balance out, and it's going to come down in its tannic component till it's at a point where the alcohol is balancing it out, and now it's drinkable. So you've got balance within the wine that sometimes takes time. Let's flip to the other side of the scale. This is a German Riesling, a Spätlese, which would be pretty darn sweet to your palate. Be like, woo, this is a full-on, this tastes like candy in a bottle, a candy in a glass type of wine. And it does. It has high sugar content compared to virtually any red and most whites you've had. It'll taste sweet. It's got high sugar content. How do you balance that out? Well, if it had nothing else, it would be it would taste even sweeter. So lo and behold, even though this tastes really sweet, guess what? It has some retaining acids in there as well. No tannins, because it's a white wine. But it does, actually, they're harvested at a time where they retain enough acid in there to balance it out a little more. Again, if it had no acids whatsoever, it would taste this sweet. Instead, it's got this to pull it back down a little bit. So it only tastes this sweet. It's within balance. Finally, we have a huge alcohol bomb. And this is a Two Hands. Oh my gosh, this stuff's insane good. A Two Hands out of Australia. And this is from Barossa Valley. That's a Shiraz, probably like 16.5% alcohol bomb. And that's boom, pulling it all the way up. If you didn't have anything else, this sucker would taste hot. It would be prickly on the palate. You'd be like, this is not pleasant. I can taste that alcohol, and I don't like that sensation. Because it ain't a York patty. It's too hot. It's aggressive. So how do we balance this out? Well, you're getting it now. This is way up here. Let's pull it down with some residual acids. Okay. Let's pull it down even more with some tannin component. Okay. There you go. Now we have a balanced wine, and it's a big fruity, luscious bomb. And again, the fruit factor can make things chill out even more. If all of these wines are in balance, if they were not in balance and were missing a certain component, what you'd have in this one is it would be so steely acidic, it would actually almost be like burning on the palate, and it would be totally unpleasant if it was out of balance and too high in acid. This one, as we've already talked about, tannic bomb. If you had this before it was aged out and in balance with its alcohol, it would taste terrible. It would feel terrible. It would be mouth-puckering, drying, not fun. It might pair with food because you could pair it up with some fat or some cheese or something else that might help balance it out, which is another whole chapter altogether, that food can help balance a wine. But if you're just drinking it, it would be terribly out of balance by itself until it chilled out with age, or you got it to a point that, the alcohol is balancing it out. Tannic, puckering, dry mouth, not pleasant if it's out of balance. Sugar, of course, most of us don't like a whole ton of sugar. And so wines that are excessive in sugar will be like, too much. It's actually kind of flabby. It's kind of gross. There's no structure there. Without the acid backbone, things seem flabby. In fact, I'll pull back to this one. That's the great thing about acid. Acid is kind of a structure. It's like the skeleton of the body of wine. And without it, you're just a big bag of meat. So without the acids in really any of these wines can be described as flabby, especially if it's high sugar. Without a nice acid balance, it just tastes like flat soda, and it's flabby, and you don't like it. And you'll hear the term flabby, which means, it's lacking structure, and you get that from acid. And finally, the huge alcohol I've also pointed out. If you have a high alcohol bomb, or even actually if it's a lower alcohol wine, but it's way out of balance, and the alcohol is detectable, it's prickly on the mouth and on the palate, on the feel, it's hot, and you'll hear wines described as, that's a little too hot. It's a little too young, it's a little too hot. Maybe let it age out. Maybe it'll integrate with time because it's unbalanced right now if it hasn't been balanced out with tannins and acids and fruitiness. Okay? That is the balancing act. And just to show you a couple other examples, I pointed out those because of particular elements. Here's a couple of more wines made from the same grape but from different places that are of different styles, but they're in balance because they've been integrated properly. And these two wines are actually from the same grape. It's called Pinot Grigio in Italy, Pinot Gris in Alsace, which is in northeastern France. The rest of the world mostly calls it Pinot Grigio, and I picked this one particularly just for you because I know most people are familiar with Pinot Grigio as a pretty light, a fruity, low-alcohol affair. And indeed, in Italy, the way they make it is that it is lower alcohol. They'll harvest the fruit a little earlier than usual. And so it's a low sugar content in the grapes, which translates to a lower overall alcohol. And it stays in balance because everything's low. It's low alcohol, maybe a little bit of residual sugar, but it's low over here. It maintains acids, but in low amounts, and it doesn't have any tannins at all. And the fruity factor bridges it. And so everything for the Grigio is low key, and it keeps it in balance on both sides of the scales. Another one, though, the Pinot Gris from Alsace, they actually let the grapes stay on the vine a little bit longer, which means they get more sugar when they harvest them, which means they can translate that into more alcohol, and they do. So they make a higher alcohol wine. So how do they keep that in balance? They have a little more of everything. So it's higher in alcohol, probably lower in residual sugar, and maybe a little bit higher in the acids. And you can do that. Again, there's no tannins involved with these wines. So two different styles. One balances on the low spectrum. One balances on the high spectrum, made from the exact same grapes. And finally, the bomb. And that is, how can you possibly look at a port wine and think about balance? Well, here's how. I talked about this one Pinot Grigio that balances low and the other Pinot Gris that balances slightly higher, a port wine actually balances way through the roof. You don't have to move. You're fine. It is high in everything, and that is actually what keeps it in balance. So when you try a port wine, it will taste sweet, and you'll be like, holy cow, this thing, I just took this class, and so I taste sweetness, so it's out of balance. Oh, contraire. This wine tastes really sweet to you, but it's in perfect balance. A good port anyway. And it's in balance because if it was out of balance, it would taste grossly sweet because there's so much sugar packed in this you can't even believe it. And on top of that, there's tons of alcohol. It's high sugar, high alcohol wine. Okay, how do you balance that? The other side of the scale, high acid retention and high tannic component and high fruity bomb flavor all packed into this bottle. It is high in everything on both sides of the spectrum and the bridge. So port wine, great example of how you keep a wine in balance by playing these different elements of the wine off each other and trying to integrate them so they make a good palate feel, a good body, but also good flavors, good aromas, good everything. But the body and balance are a part of a good wine being good, a great wine being great, and a not so hot wine that just don't work is probably off on one or more of these elements. But now let's get on to something completely different.